Welcome to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership, where you'll hear insights and useful strategies, as well as lessons learned from other nonprofit leaders and valuable tips from a variety of experts. Here to help you with the challenges and opportunities you face day after day is your host and nonprofit leadership expert, Sarah Olivieri.
Hello, nonprofit leaders, and welcome to your go-to place for information and inspiration to help you be even more effective. I'm your host, Sarah Olivieri, and today I have a special guest for you, Alan Harrison, who is a weekly columnist for artsjournal.com. He is a writer, father, performer, executive, board member, consultant, recovering artist, I come from a family of those, and the author of the industry bestsellers, Scene Change: Why Today's Nonprofit Arts Organizations Have to Stop Producing Art and Start Producing Impact, and Scene Change 2, the 5 real responsibilities of nonprofit arts boards. For 30 years, he has led, produced, directed, promoted, raised money for, starred, and failed in over 300 theatrical productions on and off Broadway and at prestigious and not so prestigious nonprofit arts organizations across the country. He is also a 2-time Jeopardy champion, so there's that. And after a lifetime in the sector, he discovered that the arts may invoke passion, mostly from artists, but nonprofit arts organizations can only be successful when they result in measurably positive change among those that need it most. Welcome, Alan. It is such a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. Tell me a little more about arts organizations as nonprofits needing to produce impact, because I was so drawn in by this point that you made that I don't hear talked about enough, that just being an arts organization isn't enough to be a nonprofit.
Well, it's not enough to be a successful nonprofit. And hello, Sarah, nice to see you. Any arts organization that files for and gets their nonprofit status, they're a nonprofit. A judge ruled that many years ago. It's actually not in the IRS's 501c3 code. The arts are not listed as a tax-exempt activity. And I think that America could look at this as, the American arts organizations could look at this fact not as, oh, well, we're an arts organization, we're a nonprofit, so we don't have to bother with that, but rather look at what's actually happened. And what's actually happened is that funding has fallen off a cliff. The only people who support arts organizations these days, outside of foundations, and even they are cutting they're giving way back. Government funding is being cut way back. I assume in the next 4 years, we're going to hear about the cancellation of the NEA, the NEH, and all of that stuff. And instead of just crying, oh my God, what's happening to our funding? I would look inwardly and say, all right, what do we have to do to be a nonprofit organization? Well, the IRS has, really simple, very simple phraseology about what it is to be a nonprofit organization. Once you start actually doing the charitable work, then you are suddenly indispensable to your community. You are not essential to, arts organizations are not essential to a community. The arts are always essential because it's like air and water. They exist everywhere. Artists are kind of magical because they can take 2 disparate things and put them together and create new art. But that doesn't really help the community. That's where the arts organization is supposed to come in. But if the arts organization is acting like an artist, going by some artistic vision rather than literally and meticulously and quantifiably helping the people in the community who need help, I'd rather you be a food bank than just another arts organization that's just putting on pretty art. So do something for the community. You suddenly become indispensable. Once you're indispensable, you get funding. Once you get funding, you continue to do that, and it becomes a virtuous cycle. Otherwise, it's the vicious cycle, and what we're seeing now with arts organizations closing across the country.
Yeah. Oh my God. So many directions we could go in there. Let me pick one. I'll start from the beginning. Why is it that you think arts organizations have seen such a decrease? Is it that they haven't been acting in this way that you're talking about? Is it another trend in philanthropy? What's been going on in
Oh,
there?
I think the trend in philanthropy, if you just go down to the bare, bones, what is philanthropy? It's the love of human beings. That's what philanthropy means. People forget that, and it's the opposite of. I mean, philanthropy. I don't know what the opposite of that word is, but it's the love of mankind.
Yeah.
Well, if the love of mankind is about helping mankind, it's turned into that once you get into donations and such. The reason that the arts are not philanthropic as they stand right now, for the most part, there are several examples of arts organizations that really are helping the community, and they can show you the results on paper or on Pixel, if nothing else. But most aren't. And the reason they aren't is because, well, for one thing, it's hard. For two, they don't really think of that as part of their DNA. We just do art. We do art for art's sake. Well, the whole point of nonprofit arts organizations is that art is not for art's sake. Let an artist say that. That's fine. But don't expect money for doing art for art's sake. That's just, you can paint whatever you want. You can act whatever you want. You can write whatever you want. Doesn't mean you're going to get paid for it, but you can do whatever you want. An arts organization, however, art is not for art's sake. It is for the community's sake and for specific outcomes within that community. And it's all fallen apart. They don't do that for the most part. They think that just the putting on of art is something for the community. In fact, what has happened is the only people who care about that, and I hate to put it this way because it's a generalization, and I know there are exceptions to all general rules, but it's the old rich white people. And the old rich white people are going to the arts, and they're contributing to the arts so that they can go to the arts. It's a phrase I have in my first book. Donors donate so that donors may attend. The donors are, in fact, the beneficiaries of their own donation. That is almost a textbook definition of what elitism is, and that's what's killing the arts.
Yeah. So, who is in that philanthropy community has shifted. We have fewer of those old rich white people donating to arts for their own benefit. And we have maybe a more impact focused community of philanthropists is what I hear you saying. And
Absolutely.
Therefore arts organizations, excuse me.
Look what happened during the pandemic. This is a key element where the arts organizations just kept crying, we have no money, send us money, we're dying on the vine here. But then they didn't do anything. Oh, maybe somebody there were some good works during the pandemic. I remember the Atlanta Ballet. I think Steve Libman was heading it back then, but I could be wrong. They turned their costume shop into a mask making facility. Great. That's a start. That's a great start. But, it's so unusual that I had to rack my brain to think of that one. So if you're crying wolf, and that's what it ends up being to the ears of philanthropists, you're crying wolf. You're saying, no, help us, help us, help us. Meanwhile, you're not doing anything for the community. And you're not even thinking of doing anything for the community. You're thinking about yourselves.
Yeah, yeah.
You're putting up signs that are almost, they're the cutesy, I'll never forget the cutesy poo sign. I'm in Seattle. The cutesy poo sign at the Paramount Theater here in Seattle said, "This is just intermission." And they thought that was cool. Well, you know what? If people are dying from a particular disease, and we lost 1 million people last I checked, maybe more, the whole idea that this is just intermission. Oh, you mean this is all about your putting on art? No, that's offensive at that point. And just let that go. And why don't you just do something for your community? So what happened was philanthropists learned the word essential because it was a word that was used. We are an essential business. Hell, delivery services were essential, right? They're not even nonprofits. Supermarkets were essential. They're not nonprofits. But arts organizations, no, sorry, not essential. And so it becomes like the old story of the little red hen. If you don't help them sow the wheat and plant the seeds and bake the bread, you don't get to eat the bread. And that's what the philanthropists have been telling arts organizations now for at least 15 years. It's been year to year, but way before the pandemic, year to year drops in funding.
So I'm wondering, to make this tangible for those arts organizations out there listening, can you give us some examples of arts organizations, what that impact looks like of doing it right?
Doing it right? Let's start with the Louisville Orchestra. That's a good one. The Louisville Orchestra in Louisville, Kentucky, and I think I'm pronouncing it the way they do there.
Louisville, yeah.
Louisville.
Something like that.
The Louisville, Kentucky. No, in Louisville, their orchestra is a terrific orchestra. Won a Grammy Award last year. I mean, it's a remarkably good ensemble. But they don't leave it at that. They stopped leaving it at that a few years ago when they started trying to put together a tour where they could do free concerts all over the state. And they have now performed in every county in the state, or the Commonwealth, as they call it, of Kentucky. This was a thing that was backed by the government, by government funding on some level, state funding for the arts in a bright red state. But it wasn't for the arts.
That's right.
The funding was to bridge the gap between the rural urban divide that has really haunted Kentucky for years. That rural urban divide is also code for black and white, but it's still a rural urban divide. There are poor white people as well. And to get music into their lives has changed their lives in each town, not just from the performance. Yeah, they could just do that, but they actually go in and do workshops with members of the community. They work in the high schools. They work in the public libraries. They do performances for little tiny kids, all free to the public, paid for by a state government grant. And it was so successful that they received the same grant 2 years later. So it's not a question of whether there is funding out there for the arts. It's a question. The question goes to the other side. What the arts organizations are doing has to help the people. Now, the Louisville Orchestra is perfect in that sense because they could not exist anywhere else. They are Louisville, they are Kentucky's orchestra. They are Louisville, Kentucky, and they are in every corner of the state. I went to a couple of performances. I remember going to one where I interviewed some people. I interviewed this high school girl who said that she had always thought of music as being something that's out there. She wasn't very wealthy at all, and her family wasn't very wealthy. It was a rural area, and she had been dragged to a concert the year before by a friend of hers who went to a different high school. This time they came to her high school, and I said, "So what happened?" She said, "Well, after I saw that, I saw that music was something special." This is a girl, by the way, who's getting straight A's and is in all the AP courses, and I mean, she could be ready to go if she could afford to go to college.
Yeah.
But she said, but my life was meaningless. It was meaningless because all I saw was me doing all of these things and getting out of high school, then working on the farm. And while I love my family and I love working on the farm, I really want to do other things. So I saw that music gave me first off, it gave me something that downregulated my anxieties of being a teenager. But then it gave me hope for something that I could do more than that. And while I don't like to peddle hope, personally, Alan doesn't like to do that. I do like to see that if the hope turns into action. And in her case, she joined band. And that was her thing. That she looked forward to that every single day. I said, well, what if you had not gone to that concert with your friend, and you had not come to this, and you never joined band? How would your life be different? She said, oh, I don't mean to get morbid or anything, but I probably wouldn't be here. I've already had ideations of suicide. I knew how I was going to do it once I graduated, and that was going to be that. So again, here we have, now I understand that that's a story, but here we have someone whose life was saved. Pretty good life, as I kind of saw. And not that there are bad lives, but this is a pretty promising young woman whose life was saved by the Louisville Orchestra. You don't hear that kind of story from other people, from other arts organizations. You hear they were engrossed, or they nurtured the soul, or which is a horrible phrase, but you hear it all the time. Or but art.
Yeah.
It's not enough as a nonprofit. It is as a commercial. I tell people all the time, go ahead, be a commercial producer. You can do whatever you want. You can do your art for art's sake thing if you're a commercial producer, and it's not hard. And you just turn your donors into investors and you pay them back.
But I'll tell you, I keep thinking about for-profit endeavors, and kind of one of the main points of learning marketing for for-profits is your service or your product is just the mechanism for solving someone's problem, or giving them something a result that they need, right? They don't want the hammer, they want the thing fixed.
Exactly.
For-profit, you're going to have to be solving someone's problem or fulfilling somebody's desire, or you're not going to make any money, because that's what people invest money in as donors or as for-profit customers. They want a result.
You're getting very Simon Sinek on me here. We're starting with why, but and that's good, It's exactly right. Out of Hand Theater in Atlanta is another one that I was just enthralled by. It. By the way, if you're listening to this and you lead a nonprofit organization, please do contact the people at the Louisville Orchestra and Out of Hand Theater in Atlanta, which turned, both of which turned around. They were both flailing. Louisville Orchestra had already declared bankruptcy and was in chapter 11, the reorganization part. And Out of Hand had just finished a production that just bombed. Even though it was a good show, it just bombed, didn't reach its audience at all. And so they said, well, now what? Out of Hand started working with the science department. They're in Atlanta, so they worked with the science department at Emory University. The science department had things to present, but they weren't good at presenting. So Out of Hand Theater said, well, we're actors. We're really good at presenting. So they started putting together productions that had to do with getting the science across from the labs. And then that morphed into social justice activity, where they now perform in people's living rooms, and they perform in church basements, and they perform small shows where there is conversation afterwards. That's part of the show among the people who are in the crowd. And then the capper of it is that they seek commitments from the people who have come. What are you going to do now that you know that these horrible things have happened, or that that Black people have lesser health insurance than white people, that Black people die 5 years younger, that whatever the issue happens to be at the time, they're on it, and they are solid on it, and they've become community leaders. Now their funding, again, it's a funding issue, comes from the city, comes from corporations like Home Depot and Coca-Cola, and not their arts funding. It's coming from their corporate funding, so much so that now the corporations are inviting them to do those plays within their own conference rooms for their own staff, so that they can become more educated on social responsibility within the cities in Georgia. And the idea has lit a fire among a bunch of people. The University of Michigan did one, did a dinner where they just had everybody come, and there's food involved. Always better when there's food involved. And they saw the show, and they acted upon the work that was in the show. So Out of Hand Theater deserves $1 million check from somebody. In fact, their budget has gone from 200,000 to 2 million in a matter of about 5 years. But they deserve another $1 million. The Louisville Orchestra deserves at least that, if not more. So can you say the same thing about a nonprofit arts organization, even a quote unquote flagship one, a venerable one? These are, to me, code words for please don't support us. Because we're just here for the old white people.
Yeah. Yeah. I think those are really great examples. And I hope they are inspiring people, which is, I think, when we have hope and turn it into action, hope that goes into action, that's inspiration, I'd like to think.
There are folks out there who think I'm pretty snarky or that I don't like the arts. And that couldn't be further from the truth.
Clearly, you love the arts. I mean, clearly, let me just say it for you. Like, this is your passion area.
It is. And it has been for 30 years. And what I want to do is to make sure that future generations don't look back on today and say, remember theater and orchestra? Remember that? That was fun, wasn't it? The way that we look back on vaudeville.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're headed otherwise.
Yeah. So let me ask you before we run out of time, because we're getting close to that time. But if it was only just what we've been talking about, I don't think you would have written your second book. So what is going on with nonprofit arts organizations boards that is especially problematic? And what do you see as the solution? And my take on boards is very radical, so you can't go too far astray.
Oh, well, they don't know what they're doing is what my research did. I did a research very short survey, 3 questions, 600. I got 600 responses. I understand that's enough, but I don't think it's enough for making, full on claims. But the general consensus, if there is such a thing, I asked them what their personally board member, what's your most important responsibility to your organization? The second was, what is your board of directors' most important single responsibility for your organization? And then what is the most important responsibility for your organization that your board of directors is currently lacking? Mm-hmm. I asked them 6 words or less so they wouldn't go into stories. And so that I could do research a little easier and say, oh, that kind of looks like that. That kind of looks like that. Fundraising was first in all 3. Mm-hmm. I'm here to fundraise. The board is here to fundraise. And what we can't do is fundraise. So that's kind of not why you're there. That's part of why you're there, but it's not but it's interesting that that's the first thing that comes to mind, because I believe that organizations have turned to their boards, and these are all arts boards. They have turned to their arts boards as ATMs rather than as people who can actually be involved and help and do the work that it takes to be part of the community. Now, some of this actually relates to all arts boards, or all nonprofit boards, excuse me. Sure. Yeah. But for the most part, if you don't know why you're there, then you have to have what I call a CTJ meeting, where you say, okay, why am I just here to write a check or use my credit card, whatever, am I here just as something that pays for what happens here? They also don't know what fundraising means. They believe fundraising means themselves writing a check rather than actually going out into the community and fundraising. So I wrote this book about I looked at Richard Ingram's book of the 10 responsibilities or it's not the 10, it's 10 responsibilities for nonprofit board members. And I think it's a good book. I think it's a really good book, and everybody should already have it. They probably do. It's got to be 20 years old by now. But arts boards are a little different because they clearly have been pushed to this non-charitable organizational format. So they their fallback, their default is to go corporate. So they keep looking at the financial bottom line as the purpose of the organization. We have to fundraise. They rarely look at the impact of their organization. Frankly, it's almost impossible to get them to look at the output of their organization. You mean I have to see the play? Yes, you have to see the play. So I came up with some rules and responsibilities. These are 5 real responsibilities of nonprofit arts boards. And some people will disagree, and frankly, I don't care. You can disagree, you can agree, argue with me. I'll go on tour with you and tell you why these are the most important. And I won't go into any of them at the moment, except one to say that the most important thing is want to. You have to want to help your community. It's intent. It is the idea that you're helping your community, not that you're putting on art. If you're putting on art, that's great. But if you're doing it for no reason other than to put on art, or, gosh, I'd love to see another production of 42nd Street with no help in the community whatsoever, except charging them an arm and a leg for tickets, I'm sorry. One more nugget that goes in there. There's I know we're running out of time. There's a 3-legged stool that has always supported arts organizations, and all 3 legs are not just wobbly, they don't exist. The first leg is that for a nonprofit metric, butts in seats is generally how they put it. Look at how many people came. Well, if you use that as a metric, then the New York Yankees could be a nonprofit. In fact, a more efficient nonprofit, because they draw not only 3 million people to the stadium, but they have a viewership of hundreds of millions of people. They're beating you out, arts organizations. And it's not a nonprofit metric anyway. It's a ticket purchase. It's a contract. You buy a ticket, you get a show, end of contract. So throw that one out. That just doesn't work. The second metric that they use is positive economic impact. When people buy tickets to a show, they also spend $20 on babysitters and dinner and parking and what have you. Well, if that were the case, if that were a nonprofit metric, every restaurant in America could be a nonprofit, because when people go to restaurants, they sometimes pay their babysitters and sometimes have tickets to an orchestra event, whatever. So that's a nonprofit. So that's not a nonprofit metric. The third one has to do with education. People get better test scores. The problem with the survey, with the study, is that it was a national study. There was one national study done many years ago. There have been follow-ups on the same national study, but you can't base local performance on national data. Right. You have to measure your own data. So I always ask arts organizations, that's great. Your students are doing well. How do you know? Are you testing them before and after the show? Do you have rubrics that show what the kids are supposed to learn? How about your adult audiences, since you've decided you're an educational organization? Are you testing them before the show? Are you talking to them after the show? What did they learn about the show? What did they learn that they can then put to life? What are the commitments that they're making? And the answers are, well, we can't ask them to do that. They already bought a ticket. They saw the show.
So that's such an important point, because I think for all nonprofits tend to skimp on the measurement piece. And when we skimp on the measurement piece, we end up skimping on the impact piece, I think.
Yeah, that's the thing to blow the horn about. Not that you did what food bank talks about how pretty its shelves are? That's not the point.
That's right.
The other part of it is that I thought Robert's Rules of Order, that so many nonprofits, do you know where it comes from?
I don't actually, but I would love to.
It was a military thing. There was a general, I forget his first name. His last name was Robert, and he had these rules. So if you think of it as a military meeting thing, then you understand why it's so restrictive. It is the least innovative way to have a meeting ever. So I created my own Harrison's Rules of Order and have put this in the book. And I urge people to look at some of these things and to do them. I'll just give you the first one, and that's don't waste the money you've budgeted for board meetings by talking about items you cannot change. In other words, stop talking about the past so much. Talk about, gosh, board meetings cost a lot of money.
They do.
They do. If you calculated the consulting fee of everybody in the room times however many hours you're in the meeting, that's thousands of dollars right there. If you had to spend thousands of dollars that day, you're going to spend it on talking about the past or the future. Duh. So let's talk about the future. If you do enough of that, you probably don't even need to do a retreat, because then each board meeting becomes a mini retreat.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have to wrap up, but I think those are such good points. But I want to ask you one more question. I can't help it. As someone who's thought about Robert's Rules of Order and creating your own, what would you say is the least helpful thing about Robert's Rules, and what are one or two things that you felt was meaningful or helpful from Robert's Rules?
So the parts that make it non-innovative is that Robert's Rules of Order is based on a military format, a military universe. So what is the military universe? It is top-down hierarchical stuff. The person at the top has all the power. So Robert's Rules of Order puts the person at the top with all the power. The board chair is deciding who gets to talk. The board chair is deciding whether they want to or not. They're deciding it. And if they want to throw something off and say, we're not going to cover that, we're not going to vote on that, we're not going to do X, Y, Z, then it doesn't happen. So it's way too much power located in one position. The board chair, look, a board doesn't own the company. I can't tell you how many nonprofits don't know this, and especially in the arts. They really don't know this. The board doesn't own the company. The citizens of the state in which you do business own your company. Why? Because you're tax exempt on a bunch of things, but those taxes have to be paid. Guess who's paying them? We are. So we're part owners of your organization. The board is representing the community. They have to go to the community, and just like you do, and ask, what is it that you need? What is it that you need? They have to act as zealots, not as ambassadors, so that they go out into the community and continue to ask because how can you fundraise if you don't include your own investors? They're already investors, even if they never set foot into your building. So it's a hierarchical problem with Robert's Rules of Order. It doesn't allow for innovative talk, except for someone who has the gumption to stand up and say, look, I point of order, I need to speak about X, Y, Z. Well, these are the things that stop conversations from happening.
Yeah.
And so that's the problem with Robert's Rules of Order. What it can do, I suppose, is it acts as an organizational format, but you don't need it really. You can do your own damn organizational format and make it work for you. It doesn't have
plenty of bylaws that don't stipulate Robert's Rules of Orders, and plenty of organizations who are using it loosey-goosey, even though they're not required to. I'll say in my own thinking, one thing that I found helpful and I don't like Robert Rules of Order is that making sure it's clear when you are making a decision is where I've seen people who just were like, we're not going to do that. And then they go all loosey-goosey. All of a sudden, it's not clear when we're deciding and exactly what we're deciding on, which I think is really important as a group, that everyone's clear when you take that vote, that you're all deciding on the same thing, and that we all know we're deciding right now. And I think that's it's
just your own. You don't need Robert's Rules of Order to do that.
No, you don't need that. You
can just say, no, we have to make a decision. Here we go. Are we hiring this person or not? Are we, what is it that we're doing?
Yeah. I love it. Well, let's wrap up. But before we do, I'd love you to share with our listeners, who do you help? Who should reach out to you? And what is the best way to do that?
If you run a nonprofit or arts organization, if you serve on the board of one, if you're the board chair, certainly, if you work for an arts organization on a management level and you feel like your words are not floating up to the top, that you keep seeing various things happening within your arts organization that are making it close, and you have a lot of people running around with blinders on, and you want to do something about it, contact me. And the best way to contact me is through my website, which is 501c3.guru. You can email me at Alan and that's ALAN, at 501c3.guru. But before you do all of that, buy the books. First one is called Scene Change. The second one is called Scene Change 2, because I have no imagination whatsoever. But they're both available wherever you buy books. I think Amazon's having a sale for they're continuing their Black Friday sale. But go to your independent bookstore and buy it there, because they need the help too.
Wonderful. Well, I'll have those links in the show notes for everybody. It's been such a pleasure to have you, Alan. Your passion for the arts does shine through. And thank you out there for listening and for all that you do to help make your communities better. This podcast is here to assist people like you, executive directors, board members, and other nonprofit leaders, to unleash your full potential and advance those missions that I know you care about so deeply. I know this because I've been an executive director multiple times, a founder, a board member, and now I'm a consultant and coach to many nonprofits. I see their challenges and I've experienced those challenges firsthand. Also, in addition to this podcast, you can get weekly bite-sized actionable tips in your email inbox. And if you're interested in receiving those, you can go to inspirednonprofitleadership.com/sign up. Until next time, take care of yourself, take time for self-care, and if you have a moment, please subscribe and leave a review for this podcast wherever you're listening to it, as it helps the algorithm help other people find it and get the same help.
You've been listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode or the bonus episodes. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Tune in every week for more useful insights and wisdom on nonprofit leadership. Thanks so much for all you do for the communities you serve. Until next time, all the best.